Good morning, it is Daily Bible Time. It's Friday morning and we're in the middle of Romans chapter 3 verses 21 to 26 and this extraordinary paragraph, this paragraph that many have seen as the most significant paragraph ever written, and we're right on the question of what it is to be declared or justified, to be declared righteous. We're in verse 24 of Romans 3. To be declared righteous is not to be made righteous in an ethical sense. It's not about causing a moral transformation in the person. And it's not that God pretends we're righteous, though he actually knows that we aren't. It is to declare you righteous. It's to be acquitted by God of all charges that could be brought against you, me, because of your, my sin. Now, though, it is no legal fiction, but a legal reality with the utmost significance. People who are guilty before God go free. They're released. And so immediately we ask, am I guilty before God? Are you guilty before God? Well, yes, I am, and yes, you are. For verse 23 of Romans 3, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Do you want to be released? How does it work? How does God declare righteous? How does God justify people? Well, verse 24. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, 23, and are justified freely by his grace, 24. Grace means generosity. Verse 23, I'm all in a mess. Verse 24, I'm freely rescued. How does it work? How does it happen? Justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. The means by which we are justified, made right, is redemption. Now, the means by which we're made right with God is redemption. Now, if you're somebody who's a little bit familiar with what I've been saying here, I just want to stress this is a point that I had missed in the past. I had thought justification was one image of what God does for me, and that redemption was another image of what God does for me. I hadn't stopped to consider that justification was what God does for me, and that redemption was the means by which or through which God justifies me. You say, okay, all right. You're not putting them parallel side by side, Dominic. You're saying redemption is the means by which God justifies. But what is redemption? Well, here's a metaphor. Illustration. I read of a hostage siege. The militants being offered a proposal. There's a whole lot of children who'd been taken hostage, and the militants were offered a proposal to exchange adults for the children. A child is a hostage, and a parent or a grandparent might say, the hostage siege was at a school, might say, look, take me and release my grandchild. Take me and release my child. They'd volunteer to go in place of the child. They'd take their chances of death or life in order that the other might stand free. But who might stand in our stead when we're under the judgment of God? The one who will go in and by our freedom redeem us. I mean, they actually won't be taking their chances. They'll be choosing certain death. And the one who goes in our place to redeem us is Jesus. Now, just see clearly how this happens, because it's very important to get the small print right at this point, because eternity hangs on it. Let's go back to verse 24. What was it verse 24 said? Through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. Then verse 25, God presented him as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in his blood. Now, let me give you the small print here of a debate that I would normally kind of fly over the top of. There's two camps of commentators amongst the people who take the Bible seriously, two teams of thought. I mean, at one level there's 3 teams, but the third one is not really worth considering. But team 1, some scholars say God's anger fell on Christ at this point, averting the anger that was directed at us. And so then we go free. Team 2, other scholars say God's anger did not fall on Christ at this point, at that point. Now, team 3, it's not really worth considering. It's I'm going to think of it as the loopy group headed by C.H. Dodd. Dodd was a big name. I'll just tell you about it anyway. Dodd was a big name. He held the professorial chair at Oxford and Cambridge at different points during his career. He died in 1973. As I think about Dodd, I think he did more harm than good to the cause of Christ. Dodd says God wasn't angry. And so he says it doesn't make sense to speak of Christ bearing punishment or God's wrath being averted here, but rather the whole idea of God being angry is pagan and foreign to the Bible. Now, I think he's completely wrong. So I think we can discount Dodd, for we have seen really, really clearly over the last few days on Daily Bible Time, God's anger at sin in Romans chapters 2 and the beginning of 3, and then that anger being averted in chapter 4. So we're really going to take these first 2 groups and look at them. The second group, the group that think that they don't think Christ's death was penal. They don't think Christ died to pay our penalty. And so the commentator C.K. Barrett, he wrote a commentary on Romans. He says Christ's death wiped out our sin. Or the commentator Jimmy Dunn says Christ's death destroyed sin, but neither say Christ bore in himself the sacrifice for sin. Whereas the first group, those who see Christ's death as penal, that Christ in his death was bearing the divine condemnation of sin in his death. Thomas Schreiner, for example, he says God's justice is satisfied in that the death of his Son pays fully for human sin. And other big names who are part of Team 1, Schreiner, Leon Morris, former principal of Ridley College in Melbourne, Don Carson, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. That's an introduction to the issue, but Monday morning, Daily Bible Time, we'll do the Bible detail of God presented him as a sacrifice of atonement through faith in his blood. So look forward to your company then on Daily Bible Time. Thanks for joining us. God bless.